we will fight to win. From now on, victory will have a clear definition: attacking our enemies, obliterating ISIS, crushing al-Qaeda, preventing the Taliban from taking over Afghanistan, and stopping mass terror attacks against America before they emerge.
For those who fought for those same goals for 15 years, most would say coming up short wasn't for a lack of trying. But proponents of another surge in U.S. troops say success may be closer than it appears. President Trump offered few details in his address, something his administration says is all part of the plan.
I think what the president has conveyed, and I agree wholeheartedly with him, is that we are not going to signal ahead what our plans are. The only way we can defeat an enemy that is as nimble and as cagey tactically as this enemy is we have to be as cagey and tactical as they are. And we've not been fighting that way.
After what were described as lengthy deliberations at Camp David, Trump said he returned convinced that a hasty withdrawal could create a power vacuum for Daesh and al-Qaeda. At present, an estimated 8,400 American soldiers are stationed in Afghanistan. They make up the majority of the 13,000-strong international force responsible for training and advising the Afghan military. But it's been scarcely enough to hold off the Taliban, who by some estimates control or contest 40% of the country. And Trump wants help.
We have been paying Pakistan billions and billions of dollars. At the same time, they are housing the very terrorists that we are fighting. But that will have to change, and that will change immediately.
Donald Trump's proposed approach of conventional military force and hard-nosed diplomacy with Pakistan resembles that of his predecessor, but some say there are few desirable alternatives. But if it didn't work then, why will it work now? A question in the minds of many who have followed the violent saga that is America's longest war. Randolph Noble, The Newsmakers.
Well, I'm joined now from Washington, D.C. by Zalmay Khalilzad. He's the former U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan, Iraq, and the UN. And also in Washington, Omar Samad. He's the former Afghan ambassador to Canada, France, and Belgium. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure having both of you on the program. Big news. Zalmay Khalilzad, let me start with you. They haven't announced the exact numbers, but it seems to be around 4,000. Does Afghanistan need this right now? Is it the right decision?
I believe it is the right decision in the broader context, meaning Afghanistan does need some additional military support in terms of the numbers that the commanders have asked for, some 4,000 to 5,000. In addition, there is a need for greater flexibility in terms of how that force will be used, the authority to be given to the commander. There is also a need for accelerating the buildup of Afghan capabilities. And there is also the need for a stronger policy, more effective, hopefully, policy in affecting Pakistani calculations, because Pakistan, as President Trump has said, has taken American money and has then supported the forces that are fighting the Americans in Afghanistan. The previous two presidents in the United States after 9/11 were not able to affect Pakistani policies fundamentally. We'll see how Pakistan reacts to a more tougher approach that President Trump has embraced. And also there are obviously issues inside Afghanistan politically that has to be dealt with in terms of reforms. And there are agreements now in place between the Afghan government and between with the Trump administration that the American assistance is based on some commitments that the Afghans have made, and that also will be important. So it is a difficult decision that has been made by President Trump, The alternative of abandoning Afghanistan was going to be more dangerous, he assessed, and his team. And we will have to see. It's a bold move on his part, alienating part of his base, perhaps. But he didn't want, during his watch, for Afghanistan to become back a sanctuary for terrorists as it was before 9/11. And we will have to just wait and see how the implementation goes and how the various actors react to it.
Yeah, alienating part of his base, also potentially alienating an ally in Pakistan. I want to talk about Pakistan in a few minutes' time as we broaden it out. But for the moment, let's stick with the kind of bilateral element here, the US and Afghanistan. Ambassador Samad, 100,000 troops at the peak of the troop deployment under the Obama administration couldn't stabilize Afghanistan. What makes anyone think that an additional 4,000 to the few thousand that are currently there are going to do any better?
Well, the nature of the war back then was a bit different. Now the combat mission is in the hands of the Afghans almost entirely. The international community's presence, whether US, NATO, and others, is one of assisting, training, and mentoring, and so on. And I think it will make a difference as long as we take the whole situation into account. It's, first of all, not a black and white situation. It's not an easy one. Afghanistan is a complex country to begin with. We have seen almost 40 years of continued bloodshed and some kind of conflict of one nature or another in this country going on. The latest episode for the past 15, 16 years being the post-9/11 Afghanistan that has tried to rebuild itself while at the same time fighting those who are trying to spoil the situation out of their safe havens in Pakistan, mainly. But it's also a complex situation because of the region and the fact that today there are more actors that are interested and have vested interest or consider themselves as having an interest in Afghanistan under new conditions. And then the internal dynamics in Afghanistan itself is very fragile, in my opinion, and I think the president should have dealt a little bit more with that. He did allude to it, but I think that unless you put the internal dynamics in focus and make sure that fragility does not erode confidence and erode governance in Afghanistan, then you will not be able to make a lot of progress.
For specific, in terms of the internal dynamics, does President Ghani know what he's doing?
I think President Ghani is learning. I think it has taken there's a learning curve over the last 3 years. I think and I hope that both he and Dr. Abdullah, his partner in the unity government, will continue to focus on what really matters for Afghanistan, what is to the benefit of the country as a whole. I think that they should keep away from any type of gamesmanship that fractures the country along whether political or ethnic or regional lines. And I think that they should focus on reform and on good governance in Afghanistan. That is what the Afghans expect. And in order to stem the flow of what is called Taliban momentum, I think it's important to make sure that we provide services and we also provide justice in Afghanistan. I think that those are elements that are important. They're not part of nation building, as Mr. Trump alluded to. I think they're part of state building and they're part of institution building in Afghanistan, and those two elements are very important.
Yeah, Tajiks, Hazaras, Uzbeks claim they're being marginalized under the current administration, an interesting internal dynamic. Let's take that quote. "We are not nation building again, we are killing terrorists," said President Trump. Ambassador Khalilzad, to Americans who are looking at their soldiers going to Afghanistan, when they look at, this has been 16 years now, The Onion, sometimes in satire, there's profound wisdom. They had a little piece about, a young soldier is thrilled to do the same soldier duty route as his father 16 years ago. For those Americans who wonder, what are we doing in Afghanistan? How would you respond to the question of who are we fighting? Are Americans fighting the Taliban, who control 40% of the country? Are Americans fighting Daesh, who the US dropped the mother of all bombs on, or both? Who?
Well, it has been a difficult situation, and there is frustration in the American body politic given the length of this war and the level of effort that has been made. America expected to have much more results, a lot more progress than we have in Afghanistan, although I think there has been progress. We tend to focus largely on negative part. You mentioned in asking Ambassador Samad that 100,000 didn't stabilize Afghanistan. How come 4,000 can do it? And the fact that the American commanders thought in 2011 or 12 that they needed 100,000 troops to prevent the Taliban from achieving their objective, and now they're asking for 4,000 to 5,000 to do the same, itself is a sign of progress. As was said before, the Afghans are doing the bulk of the fighting. I think President Obama, because of the domestic circumstances that I alluded to, he reduced the force dramatically, left a residual force that was too small. The military wanted what they are asking for now under President Obama, but he did not agree with it. President Trump is accommodating to the military's wishes. And at the same time, of course, there were these rules of engagement that President Obama imposed on the military, which is that they were not to attack the Taliban except in some specified and very limited circumstances. That the American war effort was going to be focused more on the Daesh and Al-Qaeda part. That also is going to change. But the Americans are fighting with the objective of preventing Afghanistan from going back to 2001. All those who are working against that objective, and that includes the Taliban, that includes the Afghani network, that includes remnants of Al-Qaeda, and that includes the new threat of Daesh, which, given its setbacks in Syria and Iraq, is trying to find a sanctuary in Afghanistan. Already it is active there. But the defeat or progress against these enemies require not only the domestic issues that were discussed earlier, and you said you'll come to it, but also dealing with the regional environment, particularly this intractable issue of sanctuaries in Pakistan, and how do you effect that? And I think that is a task that this president has taken on more frontally than was the case under President Obama and President Bush, although both tried to shape Pakistan's calculation, but what they tried did not work. We will have to see whether what President Trump will try, which will be more forceful in my judgment, based on what has been said, will work. And
so let me ask you about Pakistan.
We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, let me ask you about Pakistan. It's been brought up twice. Let's go for Pakistan right now. Now, Imran Khan has a lot of political capital right now because of what's happened internally in Pakistan. He's a man who could well be the next prime minister of the country. Here's what he had to say on Twitter. We fought 2 wars in Afghanistan at the US behest, paying heavy human and economic costs both times. We sacrificed 70,000 Pakistani lives in the US war on terror. Our economy suffered over $100 billion in losses. In addition, there were intangible costs on our society. Time for Pakistan to say never again. This should teach Pakistan once and for all a valuable lesson. Never to fight others' wars for the lure of dollars. We must also reject being made scapegoats for the policy failures of the US and India. Ambassador Khalil Zaid, does Imran Khan make any sense there, or is he deflecting from the fact that Pakistan supports the Afghan Taliban? Which one do you think is true?
I think it's the latter. He's seeking to deflect. We know that he's very close to the security and military establishment, and they have used them to weaken the elected government in the past, and he continues to play that role. And I think the fact is that Pakistan hasn't fought, especially in recent years, in support of the U.S. It has sought to frustrate the U.S. Objectives and to make money besides on the side, which is that the U.S. has provided a lot of assistance, military and economic, to Pakistan and Pakistani companies to allow the U.S. access to its infrastructure to take supplies to Afghanistan. But at the same time, Pakistan has been an arsonist, if you like, as well while presenting itself as a firefighter. It has allowed the Taliban and the Haqqani network sanctuaries. They recover there, they train there, they get weapon supplies through there. Pakistani elements come with them inside Afghanistan. Some operations are carried out as almost a subcontract by ISI given to particular groups to attack particular targets. And the U.S. didn't know a lot about what the Pakistanis were doing in earlier periods because they were very clever in hiding what they were doing. But now it has become quite clear, and American military commanders and American leaders have become much more aware. And President Trump, as I said before, more frontally is focused on it than was the case earlier.
So then let me ask Omar Samad, why the specific focus on Pakistan if, fine, a lot of this may be true, but others are also getting involved. The Taliban themselves say Moscow is giving them weapons. The Iranians are getting involved. Afghanistan, as always, is being a sort of proxy battleground for multiple powers. Why is President Trump going after the Pakistanis only when other people are also getting down and dirty and maybe funding the opposition?
Well, Pakistan mainly, I think, is because of the history of the past 20, 25 years, if you look at it. And I think Ambassador Khalilzad pointed to that correctly. These are the facts on the ground. These are the realities that Afghans have been facing for the past 16 years and even before that. So we do see a consistency with Pakistani so-called strategy. Some people call it, a strategy that is based on fighting India and turning Afghanistan into a battlefield. Others think that it is part of a vision for using extremist and radicalism that incorporates terrorism. And so whatever it is, Pakistan has unfortunately been the core issue as far as Afghanistan's security is concerned. Now, this does not mean that others are not interested or others are not also involved or engaged. Some positively, some negatively, some are new, have new games to play. And I think that since Daesh has appeared on the scene, we are seeing some new alignments and realignments emerging in the region, which is why this is becoming more complex. And I think this is why President Trump should have probably spent a little bit more time also sending some more clearer messages to Moscow, to Beijing, to New Delhi, which he did to some extent, and maybe even indirectly to Tehran. I think those capitals will continue to play an important role. Let's hope that that role is not the role of a spoiler, that they are constructive, as they have been since 2001, when the Taliban were ousted from Afghanistan. Most of these countries have played mostly a constructive role in Afghanistan. We would like that to continue. So that requires American engagement. Diplomatically, I think President Trump and his team need to really make some concerted efforts and hard decisions on how to bolster U.S. diplomatic mission in regards to Afghanistan, especially in those capitals.
Zalmay Khalilzad, you're nodding in agreement. Is it happening, or is President Trump going it alone and doing this unilaterally? Is he working with his partners or the regional players?
I think he will be working with obviously the NATO partners to begin with, because they have a presence also militarily in Afghanistan, and they have committed to doing more, and they will do more, in my judgment, in the aftermath of the announcements from Washington. Second is the president is reaching out to a new or enhanced partnership with India to do burden sharing in Afghanistan because of the frustration, I think, of waiting for Pakistan to change policy and keep India at arm's length or not to take full advantage of India's willingness to help, fearing that that would antagonize Pakistan. But now I think there is a belief that that strategy failed, so let's get India to bear some of the burdens. With regard to the other powers in the region, Iran and Russia, I think the president did not talk about those. Would have been worth talking about them. It seems to me, at least, that recently there has been a shift to more negative policy on the part of both in Afghanistan. In the case of the Russians, it has to do with the shift in the balance of power on the ground, which hopefully this new American strategy could affect, which is that the Taliban were getting stronger and ISIS was acquiring a presence, and the Russians, U.S. relations also have their problems, that the Russians were adjusting by reaching out to the Taliban in part to use them against Daesh, perhaps, and also to gain leverage vis-a-vis the United States. And in the case of Iran, I think similarly, there is the issue of the shift in the balance. The Taliban were becoming more important, so like Russia, Iran wanted to engage with a growing or a power, and at the same time, the problem of Daesh. But there is also the issue with regard to Iran, not only of the U.S. increased hostility, but also the water issue between Iran and Afghanistan. The Afghan government has been talking about regulating the water supplies from Afghanistan to Iran. And that has had the Iranians concerned that, and I think they have reacted negatively to that by perhaps creating circumstances in that part of Afghanistan that could make it difficult for Afghanistan to build dams that it wants to do to affect water supplies from Afghanistan to Iran.
And that's quite illuminating, looking at some of the issues related to the neighbors and the reasons for why they might be doing what they are doing. Before we end this, I have to ask both of you about a very crucial element of this, the fact that there's no timetable. Now, Barack Obama had a timetable. He was criticized for it. Omar Samad, people were like, oh, you said you're going to leave on Sunday? Well, the Taliban will just come back on Monday, right? Major criticism of the timetable. No timetable from President Trump, but isn't that in some ways worse because this commits the U.S. to an endless forever war, an endless quagmire if the Taliban and Daesh and others can scupper the U.S. and their plans and just give them a bloody nose every so often. It's going to be an endless war, isn't it, sir?
No, I don't think so. I think it's smart not to announce any dates. I think it's smart not to even announce any numbers. I think that the less you talk about what you're going to do, but make sure that you have tools in the toolkit to make sure that you change the situation for the better, that there is a strategy and that there are ingredients of this strategy that touch upon all these different things that we talked about. I also don't want to forget by saying that stability in Afghanistan also means political stability. And political stability means making sure that the Afghan people and their democracy that they're trying to build functions properly. I think this is very, very important because it's within that context that the Taliban might one day find a way to be incorporated within the Afghan body politics. And that could be a solution. Otherwise, we will be fighting this forever over whatever terms are used, and this will become a proxy battlefield. We want to avoid that. So I think that tactics matter, and you don't have to discuss everything all the time and share it with your enemy.
Very finally, Zalmay Khalilzad, no timetable. How long would you recommend that the U.S. keeps their troops in Afghanistan?
Well, you know, we have been in Germany and Korea since the Second World War, and we have had a presence in Turkey for a very long time. If the American people believe that the cause is important, and that the administration or the American government knows what it is doing and has confidence in the strategy, then why have a timetable? Timetables tend to I see the logic for domestic purposes, and it can also be used to motivate the Afghan government to take the steps that it should. But it has a big downside, which is that the enemy can wait you out, and therefore I support not putting a timetable. That doesn't mean it's an open-ended commitment. The government of the United States can always internally review, make different decisions, but you don't have to say at the beginning of a new policy when that new policy will end, which is the mistake, in my judgment, that President Obama made.
Well, it was great having the opportunity to tap into your expertise, pick both your brains. Ambassadors Zalmay Khalilzad and Omar Samad, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.